What's up everybody, welcome back to Life So Crazy, it's the VongolaBoss here. So when Sony announced they would not be releasing a new major existing franchise title until 2025, I decided to take a look back on some of the games that have made up the PS5 console generation so far, specifically the direct sequels of PlayStation's most notable first-party exclusives. And I know I'm not the only one who thinks this, but compared to their predecessors, they were, well, disappointing. To be exact, their stories were. Looking at The Last of Us Part 1 and Part 2, Horizon Zero Dawn and Forbidden West, Spider-Man 1 and 2, God of War and God of War Ragnarok. The latter all have superior gameplay and all the bells and whistles you'd expect from a sequel, but story and even character-wise to a lesser extent, they just don't hit like the first, and all to varying degrees, because while some are just underwhelming, others will have you awakening a Mangekyo shrine. And so help me God, if Ghost of Tsushima 2, another highly anticipated sequel, follows suit, I will have Jin pay the ultimate price. But more on that later. Now maybe it's just me getting older and more cynical, but I can remember fondly enjoying my playthroughs of the first entries of the aforementioned series. The gameplay and compelling narratives really felt like the devs and the writers were cooking like they were in a shokugeki. Then years later, the sequels for these games released, with gameplay even better than the first. But they also had lackluster storylines with disappointing endings, managed to tear apart everything you loved about its predecessor, introduced plot lines that amounted to nothing, to outright character assassination. You could say it's the novelty wearing thin, which has been the undoing for many sequels, but, and this is just speculation on my end, I can't shake the feeling that due to the success of the first games, liberties were taken with the sequels knowing they would sell well. I seldom use the term cringe to describe something, but when the shoe fits...
Give people stuff you know they want, so you can inject things that maybe they aren't familiar with or maybe they don't know they want, but make them like that stuff.
I beg your pardon?
When high sales are a foregone conclusion, then the funny stuff starts going down. But I digress. One instance of a disappointing sequel you can let slide, but going 4 for 4 is crazy. It shows something is up. Now allow me to set the table.
See, there's a sequel. Wasn't as good.
The Last of Us Part 2, which I'm not going to speak on at length because out of all the games being discussed today, it's the series I've interacted with the least. They are games which I have no desire to play, but the world, story, and characters are interesting enough to where I'll watch full playthroughs and breakdowns to see how everything plays out. Even though I'm on the outside looking in, the canyon-wide disparity between how people regard Part 1 and Part 2 speaks for itself. The reception on Part 2 will vary based on who you ask, but there's no doubt that this sequel disappointed a good amount of those who enjoyed the first. And to avoid beating a dead horse, I'm just gonna leave it at that.
Keep your expectations low and you'll never be disappointed.
Now, God of War 2018 was my introduction to the God of War series.
Boo!
Chill on me. I'm not one of these folks dissing the Greek era for the Norse. In fact, playing the reboot only increased my desire to play the original games to get the full picture. Here's hoping they all get ported as rumors would suggest and don't get censored in the process. Nonetheless, my real issue with Ragnarok is the event the game is named after. It was one of the most anticlimactic and rushed finales to a game I've played in a minute. This is a take as cold as Thalmor's breath, but Santa Monica should have made the Norse saga into a trilogy. It's mind-boggling the parts of this game they chose to flesh out versus the one they chose to cut corners on. I understand the purpose it served, but it's still crazy how they made sure we took our time picking fruit and learning about the champion of the Jotnar in Ironwood, but the attack on Asgard happens in the span of a runic cooldown. The lackluster finale of Ragnarok is unfortunate considering the game starts off stupidly strong with the first 2 boss fights, only to stall shortly after with Kratos adamantly opposing doing anything that may start a war with Odin in order to avoid fulfilling the prophecy of his death and leaving Atreus alone to fend for himself. Despite this, he reluctantly concedes to his son's demands to learn more of his true purpose over the fear of pushing him away altogether. All this only for his son to inadvertently cause the chain of events that make Ragnarok inevitable. I remember the hype of Kratos sounding Gjallarhorn only for the war to hit like the weakest drop from a roller coaster, compared to the last Baldur fight in the last God of War. On top of that, the way significant events of Ragnarok are just briefly glossed over only exacerbates the feeling that more should have been done with the Norse setting. Things like Surtur having no real presence, Freyr convincing the light and dark elves to unite for the war. You know, the same elves who've been at war for the longest now suddenly coming together because they happen to like betrayer? Guess I owe him an apology. I really wasn't familiar with his diplomacy game. And don't get me started with Thor's battle with Jormungandr. Like, bro, how exactly did these get relegated to off-screen moments or mere background scenes? Ragnarok's story was a reminder that bigger isn't always better, especially when compared to the more straightforward narrative of God of War 2018. The payoff of that game's events is much more satisfying. We see God and Boy go on a journey throughout the Norse lands to scatter the ashes of Fae, overcoming trials and tribulations that help strengthen the bond between the father-son duo, while Kratos reconciles with his past. Undoubtedly a Kratos story, while the plot in Ragnarok is largely spearheaded by Atreus, who in his search for his true purpose causes problems everywhere he goes in true Loki fashion, while acting like an oblivious idiot while doing so. Ultimately, I just felt extremely underwhelmed with Ragnarok considering the high expectations I had for it, in contrast to its predecessor, which I had no expectations for and didn't even give it a chance until I needed something to play during the lockdowns. But once I did beat it, I understood why it won Game of the Year in 2018. Fast forward to 2022 and I could not say the same for Ragnarok.
Oh, you may lack sense, but you don't lack courage.
Now this is gonna sound crazy, but if you would have told me that when the PS5 was announced that the sequel I'd enjoyed the most was Horizon Forbidden West, I would have looked at you like, "Y'all smoking crack!" I had expectations for it, but not to the degree I had for God of War Ragnarok and Spider-Man 2. But here I am with over 200 hours played, having to admit that it was the least disappointing out of the three. Horizon Forbidden West to this day is still the best looking game I've seen on the PS5, and just about everything outside of the story and Aloy sounding better on mute is leagues above Zero Dawn. How they were going to expand and build upon the history of the old ones was what I was most interested in seeing in the sequel. We uncovered the truth of the world and the machines that roam them while managing to stop the force trying to destroy it. Now the world in the absence of Gaia is collapsing, and Aloy only has months to restore it before all life on Earth is killed yet again. Now I get that recreating the intrigue and mystery of the first game is a tall task, but I wasn't ready for how the sequel was going to compensate for that. Now hear me out. I know it's a sci-fi game where you destroy lethal animal dinosaur robots with primitive weapons like a bow and arrow, but prior to Horizon Forbidden West, it still felt well grounded and cohesive. Everything starts smooth. You're traveling west for a Gaia backup to stop the Blight, and the threats at hand are Silence, Hades, and the unknown machines and tribes of the Forbidden West. Things pick up when Aloy is jumped at the embassy by Regalla and her rebels, but we haven't lost the plot yet. Shortly after, the main antagonist of Zero Dawn, Hades, is destroyed. And just as Aloy gets her hands on a Gaia backup, space angels, I mean demons, pull up. I know they were foreshadowed, but no amount of it could have lessened just how out of place they look. In fact, their inclusion feels more like it was because the stakes needed to be raised now that Hades was no longer a threat. And talk about upping the ante on steroids. That aside, I was still curious to see where they would go with them, but by the end of the game, I was left underwhelmed. We got some cool moments, sure, but outside of the couple run-ins in the main story, just like Regalla, their presence felt like an afterthought. For the majority of the game, the Far Zeniths are like a looming shadow you hope you don't accidentally cross paths with as you're restoring Gaia's sub-functions. But when you finally do, they get packed up just as quickly as they came. They're brushed aside just to introduce the main antagonist for the third game, which happens to bring the Horizon series full circle, Nemesis. Another malevolent AI, this time comprised of the minds of the Far Zenith we just dispatched of, is making a beeline towards Earth to finish what it started. Okay. To me, the story wasn't bad, it just jumped the shark compared to its predecessor. All I can say is the one thing it did do well was help prepare me to brace for the leaps Horizon 3 will have to make for Aloy and the rest of humanity to stop Nemesis.
What's so great about the new Spider-Man anyway?
Now for Spider-Man 2, which for me is easily the most disappointing of all these sequels, and I've not been shy in voicing that. I know Insomniac was rushed, but the final product still amounted to turning Peter into a sorry gump, glazing Miles while making him the main Spidey, and taking elements from other Spider-Man games, including their own, but not really doing much with them. I'm talking word for word, bar for bar. Both Spider-Man 1 and 2 showcase a close relationship between Peter and another scientific mind who both strive to change the world for the better with their respective tech companies. The catalyst that turns them against each other is Norman Osborn and his top secret medical treatments designed to cure his son. That treatment ends up infecting the city and throwing it into turmoil. Both games end with Spider-Man saving the city after donning a new suit that counters and helps him defeat his friend turned foe. How you managed to copy what you did well the first time and have it come out worse is beyond me. Seeing this game include a symbiote invasion after how weak the Black Suit storyline turned out really made my blood boil. Not because it didn't make sense within the context of the game, rather it was because it didn't feel earned. If you're going to take a big part of what Web of Shadows did well and spent half of its story building up to, you'd better incorporate it properly and have a Black Suit that's up to snuff. And while Insomniac's version has a nice design, I felt it could have benefited from more than just a couple new takedowns, abilities, and a surge mode. From a story's perspective, Peter losing himself to the Black Suit is just way too abrupt and needed more time to develop. I always enjoy seeing how writers depict Peter's initial reaction to the suit. The man has super strength, can stick to walls, and dodge bullets. Yet he's fascinated how this seemingly innocuous suit enhances his supernatural abilities and
Makes me a better Spider-Man.
at first glance, the suit is all pros with no apparent drawbacks, but the more he indulges in it, the more it subtly but gradually corrupts him. Let's take for example Peter becoming an edgelord. The moment Peter gets the symbiote in this game, he's frame one brutalizing Kraven's goons.
Ooh, that brother's floating in the air. I'm sorry,
It's a cool part of the game, but it's an instant 180 shift of his personality. Call it a nitpick because it does pull back the next mission and actually has a slow burn. Besides that, Peter was way too tame while wearing the Black Suit for me to actually believe he deserved the demonization the public threw at him. Prior to him stopping the lizard, the worst we see him do is raise his voice, snap at people, and aggressively take down criminals, yet the city around him is turned on him. It's extremely forced, just like MJ's reaction to Peter after he stops the lizard.
Peter, the two of you tore through half the city. Like, did you see what you did to the museum? I'm honestly surprised nobody got killed.
I'm not. And you know I had to cure him somehow. I mean, should I have just let him keep destroying things on his own?
That's not the...
Let me remind you, this game takes place 10 months after the events of Miles Morales, and that game starts off with Rhino rampaging through New York and blowing up a gas tank. Apart from the tameness, the redemption of Peter Parker was my least favorite aspect of the Black Suit arc, because he is robbed of his come to Jesus moment. Instead of having Peter cross a line that requires him to pause and reevaluate himself, you know, the moment where he either does or nearly does something he would regret and is now questioning what has he become. But here, Miles is the one that forces Peter to take a look in the mirror. And he does so by literally beating the brakes off of him in order to get him to kick the habit. And I shouldn't need to mention how goofy that was, considering Miles had just gotten enfolded by Kraven. I know a big part of this game was to show that Peter needs help too, but I just don't think it was executed well. Be greater together.
Oh, it's fake.
Falls flat when only one side is handling business while the other is constantly being saved like a helpless child. I wonder if the writers for this game have a good explanation of how Miles can throw Peter sky high, with one hand I might add, but needs MJ to carry him to safety. Gotta speak on the waste of what's in my opinion the most interesting part of a symbiote story, that being how Peter moves beyond it after realizing the power it granted wasn't worth losing himself over. Except he doesn't, but instead gets to indulge in the habit, reaping all the benefits consequence free, and somehow still manages to lose to Venom, despite being the literal antithesis of it. I gotta be real, unlike the first, Spider-Man 2 is an exercise in patience with how it tries to insult your intelligence. From Mary Jane walk 'em down Watson clearing symbiotes like she's Jill from Resident Evil, to Peter having his brain shut off every other mission. For both Spider-Man 1 and 2, I took breaks once I reached the third act. The former was because I didn't want to beat the game too quickly, while the latter was due to an utter disgust with how the story was playing out. Never thought I'd see the day I had to force myself to finish a Spider-Man game, but here we are. After this string of disappointing sequels, the question now is, will Ghost of Tsushima 2 actually be the Sony sequel that successfully manages to not only improve its gameplay, but deliver a story that's as good or even better than its predecessor? They could explore Jin trying to survive with the head of the ghost being wanted in mainland Japan, the second Mongol invasion. Honestly, there's a lot of cool directions they could go in. With Ghost of Tsushima, Sucker Punch delivered a love letter to samurai movies and Japanese culture, which has me inclined to believe they'll do the same with their sequel. But I said similar about Insomniac prior to Spider-Man 2's release. For all we know, this game may go the way of subverting the expectations of fans. Only time will tell as we wait for its reveal. All that to say, this is why you need to play games outside of just the first-party linear movie games, because modern gaming will make a cynic out of you. As I wrap this video up, I'll say the same thing everybody says about these type of games, is that they were not bad. Despite my criticisms for the games I did play, I actually did enjoy most of what they had to offer, mainly when it came to gameplay. But these games also tell stories, and their second chapters fell short of the first. Compliments to the gameplay designers for holding it down, but these studio writers' rooms need to be investigated. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you're new, and drop a comment down below. I want to hear what y'all got to say about these games. Toss in your 2 cents and check out the 2 videos showing up on the screen to see more Life So Crazy. It's been the VongolaBoss, and I'll catch y'all next time. Peace.